Podcast City Network.
What is up, beautiful people? Welcome to episode 173 of the Nest Podcast. I am the People's Champ, Brandon Brewer, and the Zach Bill is joining me once again tonight. Zach, what's up, my man?
Hey, how's it going?
It's going well. As you can see, I've got a little bit of a new background going on. This is something that my wife and I have been working on kind of in secret for the past week and a half or so, and it finally is finished and ready to display and show the world. And I'm pretty happy with it, pretty proud of it. Man, my wife is really good at designing these things.
Yeah, that's
from
pretty
scratch.
awesome.
Yeah, like I was sending you pictures the whole time, like going to Lowe's or Home Depot with just tons of wood crammed in the back of our SUV, and this is what we made out of it. It's pretty sweet.
Yeah, that's pretty awesome, and especially for obviously somebody who doesn't have a background in that kind of thing to just be able to kind of piece that stuff together. Hats off to her. Hats off to you guys. That looks pretty slick.
Yeah, she's the major brain force behind it all. She was the one with the pen to the paper trying to do all the calculations for what measurements needed to be. She was the one that was going out and cutting the wood to the exact specifications. I was just the pretty boy that was hammering things in, or actually nail gunning things in, and holding things in place while she made sure that it was right. But yeah, it worked out great for us. And like you said before we come on live, I think I've got a new addiction because I'm going to be filling this thing full of pristine memorabilia very soon.
Yeah, absolutely.
But Zach, we've got a lot to talk about tonight. Let's not talk about that for too much longer. On this show, we have a pretty good track record of predicting end of year awards. You know, you predicted both of the rookies of the year in Major League Baseball this year. In spring training, I predicted the AL MVP, Shohei Ohtani. We both last season predicted Aaron Rodgers to be the MVP of the NFL. But this year, it kind of seems like there's going to be a bit of a toss-up when it gets into that. We'll get into all that, but before we do, what did we actually even watch for Week 12? Week 12 of the NFL season was absolute garbage.
It was quite a shocker of a week, to be completely honest. I think you hit the nail on the head there. The complete garbage that it was crazy. I specifically remember the Sunday night football game just being a complete hodgepodge of mismatched just stuff. Did you catch that at all?
I did. I watched quite a bit of it, and I wish that I wouldn't have, because it was a big waste of time. You know, you've got Lamar Jackson out there throwing 4 interceptions, still winning somehow.
Yeah,
it's ridiculous.
Specifically, whenever the Ravens were trying to go for it on 4th down, and the play kept being blown dead for one reason or the other. I think the first time that the Browns had 12 men on the field, and then something happened, and then they actually had a play, and then the ref said that play didn't count. Something happened, and they just kept having to do it over and over and over. It was just completely ridiculous. And the announcers even commented on how just ridiculous the whole thing was. And I think that kind of sums up the whole week, because it was just like professional football. Are we sure we're watching professional football?
Very Bush League, very, very much so. And, you know, the whole week in general was kind of like that, because starting with the Thanksgiving games, you know, Thanksgiving is historically a great day for football. People love to get to sit there and eat a ton of food, drink a lot of beer, and watch a lot of football. Thanksgiving is good for all of those things.
Yeah.
So, but this year, the games were pretty terrible. We had the Bears and the Lions as the as they coined it, the appetizer of the day. And it left my palate not wanting to watch much more, because that was a 16-14 game where we basically just sat there and watched sloppy offenses on the field.
Yeah.
Not much going on. Then we had the Raiders and the Cowboys game, which was pretty enjoyable. That game was a decent game for the main course, as they build it as. And then the dessert was the Bills and the Saints. The Saints have like 3 people that are actually healthy, and then the Bills just went in there and wrecked shop. So it was not a very good Thursday for football. What's your major takeaway from those 3 games?
I pretty much agree. I definitely expected the Saints game to be a little bit more competitive than it was, just considering how kind of poorly the Bills were playing for the past couple of weeks. They kind of got beat up on. I thought maybe the Saints could take advantage of that. And I also thought that old Simeon could do a little bit more than he could. Clearly that wasn't the case. And I get it. Obviously having Alvin Kamara hurt yet again and out again another week was a rough go of it. But I guess they couldn't get anything rolling, and the Bills kind of had a little bit of a bounce back game for them. And for the rest of the games, I mean, obviously the Bears and Lions game was JV at best. And I think we said that on one of our group chats.
Yeah, we have a text thread with the guys from the Sportzilla podcast, and we were talking about that being the JV game of the week.
Man, it was interesting for me, seeing as how I picked the Lions to win, and they were poised to win by 1 point for about a minute or so until a kicker hit a chip shot that I probably could have made. But yeah, not necessarily the most exciting game ever. And I think that kind of carried on through the week, at least as far as professional football goes.
Yeah. College had some exciting ones to talk about, and rivalry week and all that good stuff. But we don't really cover college football too much on this show. But yeah, there were some good ones this past weekend. Mm-hmm. Michigan beating Ohio State for the first time since 4K TVs have been around. That was pretty impressive. Yeah. And just a lot of good stuff going on. But the only game that I found myself really enjoying on Thanksgiving was that Raiders and Cowboys game. And it was a back and forth affair. The Raiders ended up beating the Cowboys, which always sends a lot of people home happy anytime the Cowboys lose. No. But it was a great game, a game that I feel like both Derek Carr and Dak Prescott looked good in. So we'll talk a little bit more about them here in a little bit in our next segment, and that was kind of a segue to that. But ultimately, the Raiders got the win, so that sent me home happy. Then Sunday, we had some games that were good, but other games that were just complete garbage. We got a comment on here saying Houday. Of course, Eric is a big-time Cincinnati Bengals fan, and they absolutely trounced the Pittsburgh Steelers this week, 41-10. Absolutely destroyed them. I know they had several interceptions. I think they had 2 pick sixes in the game, if I'm not mistaken. They were absolutely just killing it. Every time you looked, they were scoring another touchdown. Our New England Patriots went out there and crushed the Tennessee Titans. The Tennessee Titans, who were the 1 seed in the AFC, now they've dropped down to, I believe, 3 or 4. And the Patriots have moved up to 2nd. And if it wasn't for the Browns sucking so terribly, the Patriots would be the 1 seed today. But we'll get there eventually. The Buccaneers and Colts was a pretty decent game. Ended up 38-31. The Colts, still a hot team. Don't count them out. They're pretty good. But a lot of these games, like, did you care about the Dolphins or the Panthers game? Not really. Did you care about the Giants or the Eagles? Not really. The only thing that really is a talking point from that game is the fact that Jalen Reagor dropped two surefire touchdowns on the final drive of the game. They lost. That's what it is.
That's terrible. And just to mention quickly about the Panthers game, Cam Newton was benched. So he's back. Cam is back
to the bench.
Whoever we saw in those first 2 games with him back with his old team must have been a fluke, because now we see, kind of the old Cam that we saw with the Patriots. So for anyone like me that thought, hey, he's had 2 good games, I've got a crappy quarterback, I'm going to start Cam, I feel sorry for you.
Yep. Yeah, that was you in fantasy this week. You got the dog crap kicked out of you entirely this week, and that sucks to see because a lot of the players that you have on your squad were advice and recommendations from me. So that's not a good thing to see. Let's see. Mr. Grapefruit's commenting on here with a fantasy question for us. I'm down 1.7 points in standard. Terry McLaurin versus his Russ Wilson. Any hope for me? The only hope that you really have is that Russ Wilson puts up another game like he did last week, and Scary Terry can go out there and just be Heineke's number 1 target. I mean, You're obviously 1.7 points down. You're not going to bench anybody. You're going to go out there and hope for it. And wide receivers, they do score 28, 35 points a game sometimes. And these quarterbacks, they can be shaky. So I think you've still got some hope.
Yeah, it's not completely over for you. I would definitely start rooting for the Washington football team defense as soon as possible. So
very, very true.
If they have a good game, that could be bad news for Russell Wilson. So we'll see.
And we know the Seahawks really haven't been able to establish a ground game lately. And they've been putting pressure on Russell Wilson, and he's been throwing a lot of interceptions. He's not really looked good since coming back off of that finger surgery. So,
right. Yeah.
What's up, Godfather? How you doing, buddy? Good to see you on here tonight. But some of these other games, like the Chargers, the Los Angeles Chargers is a team that's supposed to be out there, a high octane offense. Justin Herbert, one of the premier quarterbacks in the league these days. He's got 2 solid wide receivers in Mike Williams and Keenan Allen. He's got a stud running back in Austin Eckler, and they only managed 13 points against the Denver Broncos. What's going on?
Yeah, crazy.
I don't get it. That game, I was mad watching that game because I ended up losing this week in fantasy by less than 1 point. I have both Keenan Allen and Austin Eckler on my team, and I'm just sitting there like, do something. I'm that meme with the guy with the stick just poking him. Do something, guys. Killed me. Absolutely killed me.
I think that's almost worse than getting completely destroyed like I did, because you should have won in many aspects, but the players that typically show up for you just couldn't do anything. I mean, I have no excuse, but I think for teams that have guys like that, like Austin Eckler, that's a shoo-in. You know, he's marked in every week without question, other than bye weeks or whatever. And I don't understand what happens when just every now and then a team will not be able to click on offense and just not get anything going. And we've talked about that in a couple of weeks now, where I guess it's that point of the season. I don't know whether it's just the offenses are getting read a lot easier by the defenses and they can't get anything going, or what it is, but it really sucks for the fantasy guys when a guy should at least be decent, you know, maybe not a 30-point game, but to not be able to do hardly anything, it just sucks for those guys.
Well, and the thing is Eckler and Allen both had decent games, just not enough.
Mm-hmm.
And then, you know, after that game went off, I still had one more player playing, and he still had his defense on the field. And my one player playing was Brandon Ayuk. And on the last drive that the 49ers had the ball, they moved the ball like 85 yards. He didn't touch it once during that entire drive. Yeah. And then the Vikings had 2 chances to score touchdowns at the end of that game. One drive, they ended up turning it over on downs. The next drive, they were in field goal range, but then they tried to go for it on 4th down, lost it or whatever. Right. 2 chances. If they would have scored one of those touchdowns, his defense would have lost 2 points, 3 points, and I would have won my week. Nothing fell in my favor. I don't know. Yeah. Fantasy football.
Yep. Eric is saying that fantasy football has been weird. I completely agree with that. The guys that you think should do well sometimes do, and sometimes just are completely just out of the game. And then hot streaks will go cold immediately. It's very frustrating. And I've heard that from quite a few fantasy football players from personal friendships and stuff like that have said the same stuff. Like whatever it is that's happening this year, one week is great. The next week is just, you get totally screwed. And it's been difficult for people to kind of just move through the whole entirety of the season. Obviously you've got injuries, but that happens every year. And just, it's a strange year for productivity and for all kinds of weird stuff.
Yeah, you talk about it being strange for fantasy. It's also strange in trying to predict who's going to be the MVP of the league.
Oh yeah.
This front runner for the MVP has been passed around like a hot potato since about week 4 or 5. Kyler Murray started out super strong and then he fell off a little bit. Of course, he's been injured the past 3 games. Maybe that hurts him in the long run, but I don't know honestly who is going to be the MVP. It seems like it's changing every single week, and everybody out there has their own opinions about it and they have their own ideas as to who they think it should be. So I think it's time that we discuss it and hammer down who we think should be the MVP of the 2021 NFL season. You ready to do that?
Sure.
So the MVP frontrunners, according to 247sports.com, we're going to go through the top 5 right now. Number 5, they have Jonathan Taylor. Jonathan Taylor is a guy that a lot of people on ESPN and other sports shows are talking about as being the guy. This is the guy that they think should be the MVP and all that stuff. Of course, a lot of that was hype after his 5-touchdown game against the Bills 2 weeks ago. Yeah, I get it. He had a huge game. He's the rushing leader. Put an asterisk beside that because Derrick Henry got hurt. If Derrick Henry was still here, he wouldn't be the rushing leader. Fact. Yeah. We named an episode after Jonathan Taylor last week because he had such a huge game against the Bills. But we have not seen a running back win the MVP since Adrian Peterson did it back in 2012. We saw Derrick Henry rush for over 2,000 yards last season and didn't win the MVP. So I don't see it as anything that he can win. Not this year.
I completely agree. If Derrick Henry couldn't have won it with his monster season, there's no way Jonathan Taylor's going to win it. First, I don't think he has the name recognition to win an award like that because, let's be honest, I think MVP is a rather biased award. These days it goes to quarterbacks, and these days it goes to those big name franchise type, once in a lifetime quarterbacks. And that just seems to be just how the votes go. And I really don't think that Jonathan Taylor has a shot to win this one at all.
No, I don't either. And like the Godfather said, they're gearing towards quarterbacks. Yes, the MVP has basically become a quarterback award.
They need to change the name of it to MVQB.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, this year it's the MV hot potato because it's being passed around. So let's get into some of these top quarterbacks since we don't think that Jonathan Taylor is going to be the man this year. Number 4, according to 247sports.com, is Patrick Mahomes. And Patrick Mahomes started off the season pretty slow, but he's turned things around for himself and turned things around for the Chiefs. Now everybody's saying the Chiefs have got their swag back. The Chiefs are back to winning football games. And a lot of it is because Mahomes has been performing a lot better. In the past 3 games, he has 800 yards passing, 6 touchdowns, and only 1 interception. Some are saying it's a little bit too late in the season for him to make a legitimate run at the MVP because he started off so slow. But we're finding out that nobody's really making a solid case for it this year. So could be Patrick Mahomes. What do you think?
Yeah, I think that's the key factor in Patrick Mahomes staying relevant in the MVP talks is the fact that no one's really ran away with it. Yeah. He is in contention because he's done enough to keep up. And I think if somebody starts to pull away, then he will lose his chance to get another one. I also don't think that he has done enough this year to win MVP. I mean, we are not talking about the Patrick Mahomes of a couple of years ago where he was just doing stuff that we hadn't really seen before and making things work that were very unique, and he kind of made them his own. He hasn't really done that this year. He hasn't been as dominant as he was in the past, and I don't think he's going to get it. If I had a vote, he wouldn't get it from me, that's for sure. But that's not to say that he has had as bad of a year as some people think. He did have a rough start to the year, but he's come back, and I think he'll do okay. But I wouldn't call this an MVP type season for him.
No, it's crazy that in a down year for him, he's still one of the best quarterbacks in the league, and that is saying something about the guy. And he is very talented and has a great team around him. But I don't think that he's been the MVP of the league this year. His slow start was magnified because the Chiefs were coming into the season off of back-to-back Super Bowl appearances. They had such a tremendous high, and then to be at the bottom of the barrel in the AFC West for so long, it was a pretty shocking low. And I think a lot of people already wrote them off at that time.
Yep.
So yeah, I don't think that he necessarily is the MVP, but in a year where nobody's really making a solid case, he's been able to weasel his way back into that conversation.
Right.
A guy that I thought would be the MVP going into the season, and I think I even mentioned it on our NFL prediction show, is Josh Allen. This is a guy that I thought would basically come out there and be pissed off at the fact that they lost in the AFC Championship game last season, and that he would go out and absolutely light the world on fire. And for the first, 8 weeks of the season, it looked like that was going to be the case. However, in the past month or so, he's really, really slowed down. In fact, the Bills haven't won back-to-back games in over a month now. Of course, they lost to the Jacksonville Jaguars and only managed 2 field goals in that game. They also got thumped by the Indianapolis Colts in that game that saw Jonathan Taylor score that 5 touchdowns. They got beat by 41-15. Not a very good performance by Allen in that game. He did have a pretty good bounce back game for Thanksgiving against the Saints, but like we said, the Saints have absolutely nothing going for them on offense. So that defense spent more time on the field than they did with their family for Thanksgiving.
Yeah.
And it was not a very, very good situation for them. He threw 260 yards and had 4 touchdowns on Thanksgiving. So he did have a good game, but he's another one of those guys that he could have had that season, but he just hasn't. He's fallen off. He hasn't really been the guy that we thought that he would be. And I don't think he's done enough to be MVP.
Completely agree with that. And I think if he had a few more pieces to work with, in particular, a running back, I think they absolutely need a running back, because for a defense facing the Bills offense, Josh Allen, Stephon Diggs, those are your number one priorities. And if you can contain those, you can win. And it seems like that's pretty possible for a lot of teams. I mean, who thought that the Jags were going to beat the Bills? That was wild. It sucks for him, because I do think he's one of the top tier quarterbacks of the league. But I think because of his situation there, his success is limited, and I think he desperately needs some help there, because he has potential to be the Patrick Mahomes type, where he can be an MVP, a Super Bowl winner. The sky's the limit for that guy, and I think a lot of people around the league say the same. Obviously, we said that their AFC loss kind of should have been the motivating factor for them to just kick it in gear and wipe the floor with everybody. I think Josh Allen is capable of that, but with this offense, it's very hard for him to find that type of success. So I think in the future he might be in serious talks for MVP, but this year it's not looking likely.
I think they need to add a solid wide receiver too.
I agree.
The Stephon Diggs is great, but like you said, if you can take him out of the equation, they don't have a great running game. As good as Singletary is and as good as Zach Moss could be, they don't have a good run game. I don't know if it's on their offensive line. I don't know if it's the schemes that they use, but they just don't have a good run game. And Stephon Diggs can't do everything himself.
Yeah, 100%.
They need a solid wide receiver too to take some of the attention off of him. Somebody like Cole Beasley's just not doing the job.
Yep.
Number 2 on the list from 247sports.com is the guy that a lot of people have been commenting and suggesting on here, Aaron Rodgers. The man who's made the entire off-field season narrative about him. The man that even before the season was in Hawaii and was holding out from his mini camp and his training camp and all this stuff, pushing the limits of what he could and couldn't do contractually. Then, he had his whole COVID conspiracy and his getting his advice from Dr. Joe Rogan and all those things. And then he even went as far as to show his bare feet on a press conference. He's had more talking heads talking about his off-field antics. And a lot of people have forgotten that he's actually been balling on the field this year too. He's got something like a 26-4 touchdown to interception ratio. He's been out there having a great season. But come on, man, surely we can't let the man that lied to the entire NFL win the MVP in the same year, right? That can't happen.
Yeah, I think that would be very tough to do. And I also think he's kind of made himself public enemy number 1 in at least the media's eyes and those type of people because of the COVID stuff and the vaccine thing. And I just think he's put himself in that camp, if you will, where I don't think he's wrong. I don't think anything he did was that egregious. Even the kind of thing where he said he's immunized, but he didn't say he was vaccinated, whatever. It doesn't really matter, to be honest. But I think because he did that kind of stuff and because he's I don't know, he's basically just become this kind of, I wouldn't say a heel, but people don't like him because of this kind of stuff. And I think that's going to follow him to the voting for MVP. He's going to have to just absolutely turn it on for the rest of the season and leave no doubt in the voters' minds. Otherwise, I think whether they say it or not, whether it's true or not, they're going to kind of remember this. And I just think because of the optics of everything, he's not going to get the votes. And I do agree that he has had a great season, basically back-to-back MVP seasons, but I don't think they're going to give him the votes.
Yeah, I don't either. And we talk about giving them votes and the voters and stuff like that. It's worth mentioning, if it were up to maybe the head coaches to vote on this, then I could lean more towards Aaron Rodgers getting those votes. But it's 50 sports writers.
Yeah,
a lot of these
understood that.
A lot of these sports writers are the same people that have been writing smear pieces all year. They've been going on ESPN shows and Fox Sports shows and talking about how bad of a person he is, or how egregious it was that he lied about his status and stuff like that, how he put so many other people in jeopardy because he's selfish. These are the people that are voting on him, not actual football people, not the coaches, not the owners of teams, not other players, sports writers. And that's where I think a lot of people get lost as to who those voters actually are. So I wanted to clarify that.
Yep. No, that's a good thing to bring up. It's the same in MLB, and I've never understood it. I've never understood why sports writers have the power to make these votes for these accolades. I understand that, it's basically their job to cover sports. So they have an ear to the sport and they kind of know what's going on throughout the leagues. But at the same time, I think they do, no matter, what they're based out of or where they're based out of or what team they cover. I think they all end up having a bit of a bias. And you could say the same about if you had owners or head coaches with a vote, they'd probably have a bias as well. But I think you could sort it out to where ownership and head coaches could have a vote, and it would make a lot more sense because those are the football minds, like you mentioned. Those are the guys who actually know what it takes to be good at football. I think if you gave Bill Belichick a vote, I don't think he would be biased about it. I think he's a level-headed enough guy to sit down and say, this is the person that actually deserves it. And I think that vote would mean a lot more than Joe Blow sports writer who gets a vote simply because that's just how it's done. I don't think that's something that they're ever going to really change, but I've never really understood it, never been a fan of it. It's kind of a very strange thing that sports does in giving that kind of weird power to the media.
I think across the board, all of these things should be left up to Hall of Famers. I think living Hall of Fame members in the NFL Hall of Fame should vote each year for the NFL MVP of that season. They should also get to vote for who joins the NFL Hall of Fame. Same with baseball. The Baseball Hall of Fame members should get to vote who gets to go into the Hall of Fame.
Yeah.
Like, it shouldn't be up to sports writers who can hold a grudge against players, or getting off topic now, but we've got Barry Bonds and Roger Clemens right now on their last year of eligibility to join the Hall of Fame. If they don't get in the Hall of Fame, the entire MLB Hall of Fame is just a sham.
Yeah, it's a wash.
But, how can you not have your home run, single season home run, and career home run champion not in your Hall of Fame? It just doesn't add up. And to add another point to that, Major League Baseball also doesn't have their all-time hit king in their Hall of Fame.
Right.
So,
and I think if you want to keep your Hall of Fame quote unquote clean, you can put an asterisk beside those players' names and say this player did have these accolades that granted him entry into the Hall of Fame, but he tested positive for PEDs or whatever it might be. And you can go down the list of players that have had stuff like that come out. And I don't think anyone would really care about that, because in 20 years, no one is going to care that Barry Bonds took steroids. I think what anyone is going to remember is the fact that he hit a bunch of home runs, and he owns a record for that. And if you don't have that in your record books, you're doing something wrong.
Yeah. It really makes you scratch your head and wonder about other histories of other things, but that's a topic for another day. According to 247sports.com, the number one front runner for NFL MVP in 2021 is the 93-year-old Tom Brady. And he's out there. He's still putting up good numbers almost every week. We'll get to more on that in a minute. But he's also got an all-pro offense surrounding him each and every week. He has Mike Evans, Antonio Brown whenever he's finally healthy, Rob Gronkowski's back, Chris Godwin, Touchdown Lenny, who went off this week. Just the who's who of players that are surrounding him. So he should be out there throwing up huge numbers each and every week. But something seems off. If you look at those same numbers that everybody's talking about, he's so good this season and all this stuff. Yeah, he started out good. He started out very good. In fact, in September, he had a rating of 109.73. Pretty good. October was pretty good too, 107.82. But for the month of November, he took a huge dip down to 82.26. He's had 9 interceptions this season. 6 of them have been in the last 4 weeks. If he continues this trend, he might be sitting beside Cam Newton on the bench by the end of the season.
That's definitely a rough dip. And it's almost 100% those interceptions. There was games there where he was throwing multiple interceptions in a game, and it was rough. And I think that might catch up with him again. Like we've said, no one's really ran away with it, so he could kind of just keep up with everybody if he kind of can keep that in check at some point. But I do think this is his to lose in a sense, because number one, he shouldn't be able to do this stuff at his age. And number two, he did have a very good start of the year. So if he can kind of pick back up where he left off and kind of just put this weird little month to bed, it might be good for him. And I do think he's probably going to get some votes from people simply because a lot of people consider him the GOAT. And this is probably one of his last seasons. So I think to kind of send him off with an MVP award would be ceremonial. And I do think that the writers kind of hold a place for him because, I mean, let's face it, he's given them headlines and talking points for 20 plus years now. So I think he could get a bit more, not sympathy votes per se, but I think he could spark the interest of the voters a little bit more than, like, say, an Aaron Rodgers.
Yeah, I don't know. Others that are included in the top 10 on 247sports.com, Dak Prescott, they've lost 3 out of 4 games. I don't see how he can be in the
No way.
mix. Lamar Jackson, he just threw 4 interceptions on Sunday Night Football against the Browns, a Browns team that Mac Jones absolutely diced. Kyler Murray, he's been injured for 3 games and his team keeps winning. Is he really the most valuable player?
Right.
Let's see. Matt Stafford. We had a lot of guys commenting earlier saying give pity votes to Matt Stafford. Matt Stafford started off hot and has cooled down significantly. They've lost their last 3 games. Adding Odell Beckham has not helped them whatsoever. Adding Von Miller has not helped them whatsoever. If anything, their team chemistry has just gotten messed up.
Yeah, imagine that.
Derek Carr also mentioned in there. He's had an up and down season. They've had a lot of off-field drama there in Las Vegas. He is rocking a 63.7 completion percentage. He's thrown for 3,400 yards, 19 touchdowns, and only 9 interceptions. I think his surge has just come a little too late.
I think if Kyler Murray comes back and starts kind of dominating, I guess, like he was, he might get it, because I think if he hadn't have gotten injured, he'd probably be the number one talks for MVP at the moment. He basically was before he got hurt, and obviously, like you said, he got hurt. The team didn't crumble and didn't lose, so kind of puts things into perspective of he's good, but he's not, the most valuable on that team. But I do think if he comes back and is able to hit dimes and hit touchdowns and tear it up, he could get that kind of momentum back on his favor, seeing as how no one's really ran away with it yet. He was kind of a favor there at the beginning of the season, so that might come back.
Yeah, it may, but to me, if I'm a voter, I'm looking at it as how valuable were you if your team was able to keep winning in your absence. Now, if the Cardinals had absolutely looked like crap without him and they've completely gone off the rails, then it's easy to say, well, Kyler was the reason that they were so good. But they haven't. They've been just as efficient. They've been out there moving the ball up and down the field without Kyler Murray, without D-Hop. They've been out there just playing the game. And to me, that talks more about the coaching than it does any given player.
The Cardinals remind me of the San Francisco Giants of baseball. Like,
there you go.
They were winning and winning and winning, and people would get hurt, and they would just keep winning, and it just never made sense. So I guess the Cardinals have a little bit more depth than we thought, because I definitely thought, number one, that Kyler Murray wouldn't be as successful as he is, and number two, when he got hurt, now they're screwed. D-Hop is out. Oh, they're even more screwed. Apparently not.
Yeah. Shout out to our boy Adam, big Texas fan. I know Colt McCoy has been making him proud out there with the Arizona Cardinals winning all these games.
Something you never thought would happen. Obviously he had a stint with the Washington football team, and then he's kind of bounced around a little bit. I guess he still has something in him to be able to come in as a second string and lead this team to some wins.
Yep. Let's go ahead and move into our fantasy studs and duds for the week. And for me, quarterback, I've got Aaron Rodgers. We just talked about him, how he's one of the front runners for MVP. And before we get into all of that, we need to go ahead and put down our mark on it, who we think will be the MVP.
Okay.
So before we get into the studs and duds, we'll just rewind and go back to that MVP talk. Who do you think is the NFL MVP, Zach?
I'm going to say Tom Brady. And I think he's going to have a better second half of the season. I think they'll probably make the playoffs. I don't think that they're going to have a big run in the playoffs. competition is going to be tough for sure. And I think in the playoffs, it's going to really turn up. But he's got a lot of weapons there, and I think he can utilize them pretty well. I think his big issue is the interceptions. I don't know if that's just the 97-year-old arm showing its age or what, but if he can figure that out, I think a lot of people are gonna factor in everything that he's done in the past, everything that he's still doing, and put that into consideration when it comes time to voting. I already think he's a favorite just for the fact of who he is. And I think he definitely wins votes that way. Plus, I think Aaron Rodgers kind of has a stigma on him now. So I think the default is going to be Tom Brady.
Stigma or not, I think Aaron Rodgers is the man to beat. Famous professional wrestler Ric Flair said, to be the man, you've got to beat the man. And in a year where there's nobody really stepping up, I don't think you can beat the man. And right now, the man is Aaron Rodgers. And, even with all the off-field antics that have happened, I think he's done enough on the field to be able to be the MVP of the league. The one thing that is concerning is this toe injury that he apparently has, the fractured toe, and that surgery appears to be on the table. I don't think it's going to be a serious surgery, because how serious can a surgery on a toe really be?
Right.
But if it does impact his mobility and he does end up missing some time or missing a step as a result of it, then I could see it being a more serious issue. But he's the guy that I think will be the MVP at the end of the year. Go ahead.
I was just going to say a stupid joke. I wonder what Joe Rogan has for remedies to fix toes.
I don't know. I'm sure it involves cannabis, though. Fantasy studs and duds. Like I said, I've got Aaron Rodgers as my quarterback stud. He had 26.28 points, 307 yards passing, and 3 total touchdowns. I say total touchdowns because one of those was rushing. So that toe wasn't giving him that much of an issue on Sunday because he beat Jalen Ramsey to the corner.
There you go. Nice. And just to kind of talk about him a little bit more, he made that Rams defense look like it was mediocre at best. And we're talking about a defense that's got Aaron Donald on it, Jalen Ramsey on it, Von Miller on it. I mean, just how much more do you need? And apparently it didn't matter at all, which is very shocking.
Yep.
My boom this week is going to be Derek Carr, a guy who, like we said, has had some ups and downs and has a rather windy season, but this week he was able to light it up against the Dallas defense. 373 yards. That's pretty good. 1 touchdown for 21 points. I think this guy is kind of a middle of the road yet solid choice. And I mean, honestly, for everything that has happened in the Raiders organization, he's been able to stay the leader of that team and do what he needs to do. So this week he definitely exceeded at least my expectations. A guy like this has a hot start to the season, and I think eventually it's going to cool off, but he seems to be doing pretty okay for himself.
Yeah, he's done well for himself. I don't know if he actually even gets MVP votes when it's all said and done. I think Mac Jones has more of a chance to get MVP votes than Derek Carr, but he definitely had a fantastic week for himself this week, and he deserves to be a fantasy stud. My dud quarterback for the week is your MVP vote, Tom Brady. And I know the Godfather feels the same way because he was harping about it in the comments. And Tom Brady, with his 11.24 fantasy points, 226 yards passing, 1 touchdown, and 1 interception. Like I said, he's had 6 interceptions in the last 4 games.
Yeah, rough. I've got my bust for this week as Lamar Jackson. We've kind of talked about that a little bit already, but somehow winning and throwing 4 interceptions is a rough day. I mean, he just did not have a great day. 165 yards passing, 1 touchdown, and obviously, like I said, those 4 interceptions led to 9 points. bad day, very, very bad day. And I think obviously this is a bit of a rivalry. And the Browns defense, I guess, was just ready for him because they posted 16 points and not the greatest showing. And that's a lot of interceptions for a quarterback of his stature. So not a great week for him at all.
No, not a good week. And somehow, some way, the Browns were just a little bit worse.
Yeah,
I don't
rough.
get it. My running back stud for the week is Cordero Patterson. This dude's been a fantasy darling for a lot of people this year. Another 27.5 point performance for Mr. Patterson. The all utility player got 108 yards rushing, added on a couple more receptions. He had 2 touchdowns. Dude's just been balling, and I know a ton of people picked him up off of the waiver wire.
Yeah, 100%. This guy was probably the sleeper of the year. I mean, he's been tearing it up, and especially on a team like the Falcons, you really don't expect them to do a whole lot. But this guy has been a stud there. I don't know his contract, but if I were him, I'd be looking to get a little bit of money thrown my way because I think he's earned it. I think he's solidified himself as a legitimate RB1 for whoever can pay him or whatever his deal is there. I don't know his deal with the Falcons.
He needs to get a deal like Taysom Hill has.
Yeah,
it's just utility player.
Yeah, there you go. My boom at running back is going to be Leonard Fournette.
Yeah,
dude had quite the day, and the bulk of that came in touchdowns. He was able to get 4 and 100 yards rushing, which totaled up to 44 points. I mean, that's a monster day for him. And in our league, he was in the flex spot. So I guess people didn't really expect this out of him, which to be fair, I really didn't either. And this was just a huge day for him.
Well, I mean, he plays in that Tampa Bay offense where you're never sure what you're going to get. It could be a day where they pass the ball and Brady has 4 touchdowns and, 2 of them go to Godwin, 1 goes to Evans, and 1 goes to Gronk or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
But then they have these games where all of a sudden Leonard Fournette has 3 or 4 touchdowns, or Ronald Jones gets in the end zone twice or something like that. It's a very bizarre offense, and it's very hard to predict fantasy-wise.
Oh, yeah.
Just because they spread it around so much. But, yeah, Fournette was the hot hand this week for the Bucs, and those that had him in their lineup definitely had themselves a day.
Yeah.
My wide receiver boom is someone that comes from our New England Patriots, and it's a guy that isn't really owned in many leagues, and that's Kendrick Bourne. He had 23.1 points. He only had 5 receptions for 61 yards, but he had 2 touchdown receptions. Huge outing for him. And like I said, he's available in 85% of ESPN leagues.
Crazy. That's wild. We doing wide receiver?
Yes, sir.
I've got Dante Johnson as mine. And this is a guy who I don't think we've really talked about much. Trying to find his little stat line here. Sorry, I know this is super interesting.
It's riveting podcast material right here.
Yep. Hey, it's free. Just remember that. All right, let me just search him. Dante Johnson. So where is his game stats?
Eric saying none of his wide receivers were booms of the week. So I feel you. None of mine really did anything either, Eric.
Oh, geez. Yeah. So sorry, I'm finally back on track. Dante Johnson, wide receiver for the Steelers. They had a terrible game, but I think for him personally, he had an exceptional game with 18 points and 95 yards. A guy who could potentially make a name for himself there in Pittsburgh as they kind of probably transition out of the Big Ben-led offense. I think we all have our opinions about Juju and Claypool. So maybe this guy can actually be a good football player for them and continue some success.
Yeah, Johnson has been the one bright spot of the Steelers.
Yeah.
And it's been the only thing that's been good for them this entire year. Everything else not so great. Najee Harris has been pretty good too, I guess. But
Yeah.
my wide receiver duds, and I say duds with a plural, is the duo of Chris Godwin and Mike Evans. Godwin had 4.7 and Evans had 4.6 fantasy points this week. Combined, they had 7 catches for only 40 yards. This in part is because Leonard Fournette was having such a great game, and because Tom Brady had such a crappy game, they kind of get the wrath of being a fantasy dud. But for both of these guys to have such a standout, terrible game, it's something.
Yeah, that's rough. And I think on paper, like we always say before the game, you talk about, Chris Godwin and Mike Evans and Tom Brady's stud wide receivers. You think at least one of them is going to go off for a couple touchdowns. Not the case. My wide receiver bust is a guy who we've talked highly about in the past, and that's Jamar Chase. The Bengals were able to put it on to the Steelers, but for whatever reason, Jamar Chase just was not a part of that. He had 3 receptions for 39 yards, gave him 6.9 points in fantasy. Not awesome. And this was, Joe Burrow's favorite target here for a while, just for whatever reason, didn't work this week against the Steelers. And none of those went to Tyler Boyd either. So I really don't know where those were going, but those 2 dudes were not a part of it.
Yeah, not at all. It happens sometimes. We've talked about the Bengals being one of those offenses that they have a lot of players that can share it around. Joe Mixon had a big game this week. So
yeah.
And according to Eric, he's going to have a big game against the Los Angeles Chargers run defense. So could happen once again for Joe.
Yep, for sure.
Yeah. Eric just said, look at Burrow's stat line, then look at Mixon's. Mixon's a stud, man. He is out there just eating up yards.
Yep.
Zach, before we get out of here, we need to talk about the MLB hot stove and how it's heating up.
Oh, boy.
And we've seen a flurry of free agent acquisitions and moves in recent days. Some of the more notable ones, we've got Max Scherzer coming back to the East Coast, but this time to the New York Mets for the tune of 3 years, $130 million. Wow.
Those are some Dr. Evil numbers.
When the season starts, he will be making more money than 2 entire teams. That's insane.
Is that a problem for baseball? I think it is. I think the fact that you can have one player make more than an entire team a problem. And I don't think it's the problem of the one player is making that much money. I think it's the problem of those teams aren't willing to put out the money it takes to have talent on their teams.
Yes, I agree with that. The 2 teams that are in question here are the Pittsburgh Pirates and the Baltimore Orioles, both of whom are spending less than $43 million for their projected opening day rosters. That is a problem. If Major League Baseball wants to try to get a competitive advantage or anything like that, they shouldn't have a salary cap. They should be allowed to go out and spend whatever they want to if they want to be a competitive team and win. What they need is a floor.
Mm-hmm.
They need a bottom, like you have to meet this threshold in order to be part of Major League Baseball.
Yeah.
That would force owners to go out there and pay players, get guys that are actually talented to come in there instead of just trading off all of their chips to guys who are willing to pay and just keeping this small little ragtag crew. Because I guarantee you the Pittsburgh Pirates and the Baltimore Orioles will make more than $40 million in ticket sales, in jersey sales, in concessions, in TV rights deals, all this stuff. So that owner is just lining his pockets, whereas other owners who are trying to be competitive are out there spending the money.
Yep. And I think that's the case for almost all professional sports. There's some owners that really do put in a lot of equity, and I'm sure it's some of their own. They they don't line their pockets like some owners do, and they actually do go out there and spend the money that it takes to be a winning team. It's funny because especially in baseball, you hear of small market teams, and the small market teams never make enough money to pay a big time contract like this Max Scherzer contract that he just signed.
I hate that argument, by the way.
I hate it too, because I think everything is connected. The reason you have a small market and that no one cares about your team is because they suck and you don't do anything to better them. If you had better players on your team, you would do better. People would be more excited. They'd come to the game. They'd spend more money. You'd make more money to pay more people, and it just kind of goes from there. Look at the Yankees, for example. The Yankees are one of the more popular teams. They've been able to spend a lot, and I would say that a lot of baseball fans say that they pay money to win, which however you do it, they are a very popular team, and they spend money to make that happen. They haven't made anything happen in quite a while, but that's another discussion. The fact is that the Baltimore Orioles don't ever spend any money. How could you possibly think that you're going to compete with the likes of the Yankees, the Red Sox, you name it, if you're not willing to spend money? I just don't understand it. And I think that's where the floor, like you were saying, comes into play.
The reason that I really hate that without the cap, small market teams can't compete. Why I hate that argument so much is name the big market teams. Name the teams that you would consider to be a big market team.
Dodgers, Red Sox, Yankees, Cubs. I'd say that's like the biggest of the markets.
Okay. Last year's World Series was the Atlanta Braves versus the Houston Astros.
Mm-hmm.
You didn't name either of those cities.
Yep.
The year before that, the Dodgers were there, but so were the Tampa Bay Rays.
Mm-hmm.
Tampa Bay, not a big market.
One of the lowest markets and the smallest salaries.
The year before that, the Washington Nationals and the Houston Astros. You didn't mention DC or Houston. The year before that was Red Sox and Dodgers. So, yeah, that got you. A couple years ago, we had the Kansas City Royals winning it.
Mm-hmm.
You know, like we've had the San Francisco Giants versus the Detroit Tigers, St. Louis Cardinals versus the Texas Rangers, San Francisco Giants versus the Texas Rangers. Those aren't big market teams.
Right. Yeah, I think Eric's probably right. You should probably put Houston in there simply because they did win a World Series and they are a rather big market for teams, but I don't think they're anywhere near the likes of the Yankees and the Dodgers. I think that's just those are the top tier teams that have big markets and spend a lot of money. But I think you're completely right. In the sport of baseball, you don't necessarily need to be that top dog team to have success. And I think, like you mentioned, the Cardinals are a big proponent of that. Not necessarily a small market team, but I don't really see very many Cardinals fans from Michigan or from wherever else. A lot of teams, or a lot of fans rather, are either locals that have moved somewhere else, or just everyone in the area kind of watches and supports and stuff like that. They seem to be competitive almost every year, and I think that's possible for a lot of organizations if you just put in the time. The Cardinals have nowhere near the amount of people on the books as the Dodgers do, but still stay competitive somehow. And I just think those teams that are always down in the dumps have no excuse. Like you said, the whole small market thing doesn't really make sense, because if you just paid good players to come play for you, they would win and people would come out and support.
Since 2001, the St. Louis Cardinals have won more World Series titles than the New York Yankees and the Los Angeles Dodgers.
There you go.
During that same span, the Florida Marlins have won the same amount of World Series as the New York Yankees and the Los Angeles Dodgers.
That's sad.
So, I don't know. Whatever. Another one of the teams that seems to be pushing all in at this year's hot stove in the offseason are the Texas Rangers. Another one of those huge market teams that spend all the money that eat it up so that nobody else can, right? when was the last time the Texas Rangers were considered a big market?
Yeah.
Don't know. But they're all in. They just spent $325 million for 10 years of Corey Seager's career. They also spent $175 million for 7 years of Marcus Semion's career. And they got John Gray for 4 years, $56 million. They went out and they spent a lot of money.
Crazy. I don't know if they spent it correctly. I would have liked to see one more pitcher. I think either Seager or Marcus Semien made sense, but both kind of a weird choice there. I think they really could have bought a better pitcher instead of one of those two guys and been better. I think I always go back to that. I always go back to, if you have success, that's because you have good pitching. Yeah. And if you don't have good pitching, you have the huge bats to keep up with other teams.
That's the Tampa Bay Rays' whole philosophy is they have historically had the better pitching. I mean, I know they just went out and they spent a crap ton on their two rookie studs, Wander Franco and Randy Arozarena, and they locked them up long term. But those are really the only bats that they're going to have around for a long time. The rest of it's going to be pieced together, and they're going to continue to just keep those pitchers in there.
Right.
So,
yeah, the Rangers today was probably the biggest shock of it all.
Yeah. And like you said, they probably needed another pitcher, and who knows, they may still go out and get another one that's still out there. We know it won't be Corey Kluber because he's staying in the AL East and going to the Rays. So he'll probably have a Cy Young season this year.
Yeah, seriously. Yeah, I think if that guy can stay healthy, he definitely has the ability and the just arsenal of pitches to definitely make a huge comeback here.
Yeah, he had a complete game no-hitter, complete game shutout, something like that, for the Yankees, and then he got injured shortly thereafter and just wasn't able to really bounce back and do anything after that. But he proved that he can still go out there and pitch well, and it'll be interesting to see what he does in Tampa Bay, who is notorious for having the best pitching available.
Yeah, studs. And I mean, he's going to be sharing the mound with the likes of Tyler Glasnow. So yeah, that'll be a very scary rotation. I would assume he's going to the rotation.
Yeah, it'll be very interesting to see what happens with him, with Glasnow whenever he comes back.
Right.
And Eric, just so you know, Cincinnati is bigger than St. Louis. The population of Cincinnati is 309,000. The population of St. Louis is 301,000.
I wonder what the metro population is, because I've always considered that the actual population of the area. But that's a totally different conversation.
Yeah, I don't know. I just know what the 2020 census said. So St. Louis apparently is a very small market team.
Yeah, I think it is a smaller market. I don't think there's very many bandwagon fans that just like the Cardinals because they like the Cardinals, because they like to see a team win or whatever. But I think a vast majority of people from a pretty big surrounding area, because I mean, you got to think, if you're from like Iowa, Nebraska, Kansas, you don't necessarily have great teams to root for, especially if you're into baseball. And the Royals have their one win, but they're pretty crap other than that. So I think you'll find a lot of people just in this kind of surrounding area that like the Cardinals because they've been good for quite a while and they're the closest team, whatever, kind of that kind of thing. So yeah, I agree. They're definitely a small market team, and I don't think they're one of the few teams that doesn't use that as an excuse, which I like.
I will agree with this point that Eric made, that smaller market teams build more from the inside instead of the outside.
100%.
Yeah, I agree with that. They typically have better farm teams and they have a better system. But whenever they get to the big leagues, they don't spend the money. I'm not going to say they don't have the money, because they do. It's up to the owners to spend it.
Yeah, 100%.
They choose not to spend the money on their homegrown talent, and then those players go off to be Yankees, Red Sox,
right,
Dodgers, White Sox, Cubs,
Yeah. even the smallest of crappy teams, the team itself is worth at least $1 billion and change. I mean, just in the sheer amount of revenue that they generate, this is professional sports. I mean, they still have so much revenue coming through, and I think that's the big difference in how teams build from the ground up, and how you do that. I don't really know per se, but man, I hate seeing year after year the teams that are always crappy just continuing to do that, because it's just got to suck to be one of those fans, you know?
According to Statista.com, the two lowest franchises value-wise in Major League Baseball are the Miami Marlins at $990 million. Miami's a pretty big media center.
Mm-hmm.
And the Tampa Bay Rays at just over $1 billion. And the Tampa Bay Rays just were in the World Series not long ago.
It does not make any sense. And you would think that Miami would be a bigger hotbed for baseball. I mean, they've got a lot of Cuban people there. They've got a lot of Dominican folks. And if you look around the league, those are the guys that are, tearing the cover off the ball and stuff like that. So you would think that baseball would be just huge there, but I guess there's so much other crap going on in Miami that they don't even care about sports. They're just ready to sit on the beach and party.
Yeah, that's true. The Yankees are still valued at over $5.2 billion. That's insane.
Yeah.
All right. You got anything else you want to talk about?
I think we're good.
Yeah, it's almost time for kickoff. We've got Monday Night Football, Seahawks at Washington Football Team. Who you taking in that one?
I think just by default, I'm going to go Seahawks, but I do think if the football team has a good defensive game, then they could squeeze out a win, but that would be very, very disappointing for the Seahawks fans and the players. I think they should win, but they could lose, if that makes any sense.
Wow. Such expert analysis.
Very
they should win, but they could lose.
Yeah.
In our pick'ems contest against the guys from Sportszilla podcast, I did pick Washington Football Team at home. I've got Heineke going out there. To our listener from earlier asking the question, I have Heineke connecting with McLaren several times tonight, and I think they shove it down the throats of the Seattle Seahawks. The Seahawks are not a good team. Let's be honest now. They are not good. Yeah. And Russ has not looked good since he came back off of surgery. Washington Football Team is at home, so I've got them going on to win this game, and maybe we'll get a new name for them sometime soon.
Is this Pete Carroll's last year?
I think so.
I think so too. I think it's just it doesn't work anymore. They had their highlight years when they were going to Super Bowls and stuff, and he is the oldest coach in NFL, and I just don't think it's working anymore. And I think his little system there just isn't what it used to be, and and it's run its course.
Yep, I agree. So we'll see at the end of the season whenever they're eliminated, come sometime in December, and then we'll see if he makes the announcements. What's more head scratching and curious for me is Russ going to end up traded?
Yeah.
And it looks like they may be trying to make a deal with the New York Football Giants to send Russ to the East Coast, which would be very interesting.
I'm sure they're going to want quite a hefty price for him. So I'd be very interested to see what they get in return for Russ if they do end up getting a trade going.
Yeah, I think it would definitely involve multiple draft picks, and if the Giants are smart, they would try to keep Saquon on the team. To keep the Russ and Saquon connection going. But you go from one dumpster fire to another, really.
Yeah, true.
All right, guys, we're out of here. We appreciate all of you commenting along and participating in the show. Eric, as always, we love it whenever you're commenting because you keep us engaged the entire time. And for everyone else that's been out there listening, we thank you so much. Tune back in Saturday night. We'll be back for another episode of Champ to Champ, and we'll be able to help you get your fantasy roster squared away and ready to win for week 13. Can't believe we're already this far into the football season.
Crazy.
And we'll be back again next Monday night for another episode of the Nest Podcast. See you guys then. We out.